My thinking is that the greatest gift that we have as a country, right, is entrepreneurship. And this has got nothing to do with tech entrepreneurship. It's generally Americans are entrepreneurs. We've innovated in every sector known to man when you go back to kind of the founding fathers.
You are listening to The Sure Shot Entrepreneur, a podcast for founders with ambitious ideas. Venture capital investors and other early believers tell you relatable, insightful, and authentic stories to help you realize your vision. Welcome to The Sure Shot Entrepreneur. My guest today is Tim Guleri. Tim is a managing director at Sierra Ventures. Sierra Ventures is an early-stage venture capital firm investing in the future of enterprise infrastructure and emerging technologies. The firm is more than 4 decades old and manages over $2 billion in assets. Tim focuses on artificial intelligence, machine learning, enterprise software, infrastructure, DevOps, and vertical SaaS. He's a very successful entrepreneur and also a very successful venture capital investor. He's been practicing the art of VC for almost 2.5 decades. We're going to ask him about how he makes investment decisions, what goes on in his mind when he meets founders in the first meeting and the second meeting, and what gets him excited to say, yes, I want to invest in this company. And sometimes he says no, perhaps more often. We'll find out why. Tim, welcome to the Sure Shot Entrepreneur.
Gopi, thank you for the invite. It's my pleasure to be on the show. And you are one of the practitioners of early stage ventures. So for us to share some time together is my privilege and pleasure. So thanks for the invite.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with you. Where are you from? You made your way into Silicon Valley and built a very, very successful career. Where were you born and where you grew up?
Gopi, I was born in Chandigarh in India, which is in the state of Punjab. And my dad was in the army, Indian Army, and we got bounced around all over India as army families often do. I did my electrical engineering from there and came to the US for industrial engineering and robotics, after which I moved to California with my first job. So that's a bit of the origin history and how I got to the US.
A lot has changed since the time when you went to college. Now, technology world has kind of taken over pretty much every industry. Why is technology interesting to you? How did you get exposed to this whole world?
It really started when I was in undergrad. My family in India used to manufacture electrical switchgears. So I spent time literally on the manufacturing floor, and that's what got me into robotics. When I came to the US, I was struck by how advanced manufacturing was here as compared to India. And also that you kept hearing about the lore of how quickly technology was moving in Silicon Valley. So what got me to Silicon Valley was not, obviously I came here for the job I got at LSI Logic, but the people that I was meeting during my visits to Silicon Valley while I was in my graduate program just motivated me to get closer to the action. And living in Silicon Valley, that there's some magic in the water and the networks are very dense and just the pace and the clip is just uncanny. And I wanted to be part of that action. And without overthinking it, I just moved here and things have gone well.
You're right in the middle of action. You are creating action now as well, not just being a part of the action. You were a very successful entrepreneur, but then in 2001, you decided to become an investor, and you have stayed as an investor for 25 years now. So you must really like venture capital. What is exciting for you about venture capital? What keeps you going after 25 years?
Let me answer that question in two ways. First, I'll just maybe highlight my key takeaways when I was an entrepreneur. And I was lucky after I got my green card, to start in a company called Scopus, which was one of the innovators in CRM. At that company, I joined as employee number 6. I did all jobs there, starting in engineering, going into the field, part of sales, running that organization, and then actually doing product management. So I call it my live MBA. What's amazing about a company that is growing really fast is that you learn to see every function in very close proximity. That business was very successful. We took it public, sold it to Siebel Systems, which was the predecessor to Salesforce.com. At the end of the journey, I felt that I was ready and had played all positions on the field. And that gave me the confidence to start Octane Software, where I was CEO and founder and ran that business for 5 years. That was right place, right time, right team, right technology, a lot of things. Timing is a big aspect, Gopi, of what we do. We sold that business for over $3 billion to another public company. And my learning from those two things was that A, I had learned a lot and I also made a lot of mistakes as a first time founder, first time CEO. And the journey had taught me the what to do, what not to do. And when I connected with the Sierra folks back in 2001, I was really struck by how they were a hands-on investor, and I decided to become a venture capitalist because I really felt that I could add value to the entrepreneurial journey, having been one, not sort of a spreadsheet jockey, right? That's just giving you advice without having been through the pain yourself. So that's what caused me to switch to the venture side. And I've stayed in venture because it keeps reinventing itself. So this is a business where the minute you think you know it all is the beginning of the end as a venture capitalist.
Very true, very
So
true.
the idea that the playbook is changing, the entrepreneurs are changing, technology certainly is changing. So if you don't have a learning mindset as a venture capitalist, you don't survive multiple decades. That's really what's kept me in the game for this long. And obviously, you meet people, you're paid to meet people that are glass half full. And I don't think that many businesses allow you that luxury. There's obviously a lot of wealth that gets created as part of the process. But for me, the people, the entrepreneurs that I'm helping, the knowledge infusion that I go through myself, and the excitement of the new technology and what is possible with that, and life changing economics for founders and certainly our LPs and ourselves are the three drivers that keeps me in the game. I just love coming to work every day. And I've just been gifted for that for the last 25 years.
I felt that many times that this job is so much fun that I would do it for free. I don't need to get paid, but don't tell my LPs. You mentioned that venture keeps reinventing yourself. You can never really stop, and you feel like you figured it out. That's actually not the end. That's beginning of a new change. Do you feel like your outlook and the way you operate has changed compared to when you started in venture, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago? How has your thought process and how has your style of practicing the art of venture capital changed over the years?
So the way I describe my career, Gopi, is that obviously I started and I was an entrepreneur. Then the second stage, I've had three sort of stages in my career, right? The second stage was when I entered venture capital, and Sierra was a mid-size on the large side of venture capital firms back then. We had a $500 million fund back in 2001. And I learned the art of venture capital. I was involved in a handful of IPOs and, successful while figuring out the business of venture capital. So after the first decade, kind of in the 2012 timeframe, came the third wave of my career, which is when Mark, Ben, and I took over the platform from the prior generation. The whole market was zigging, and we chose to zag. Everybody wanted to build bigger funds and larger AUMs, and we felt that was not something that was most interesting to us. More importantly, it was probably better serving for the entrepreneur if we kept the funds small and concentrated and joined them in the first stage of the journey. So we optimized everything in the platform for that exact stage, which is seeds and Series A's. Because I feel capital is somewhat of a commodity. It is the time that you're able to give an entrepreneur, like quality time at the pivotal moments when they need that. I think that's ultimately the gift of early stage venture capital, and that we practice with a lot of passion and a lot of availability. We're 24/7 like our entrepreneurs. You can call anybody at Sierra on the investing team at any time of the day. That's sort of the ethos. You wake up every morning to earn that job that the entrepreneur is going to place their trust in you. So that's a little bit on the structure and the kind of the way we approach the job at hand. The realization, which is the question that you asked, is that ultimately the public market doesn't care about what you're building. And entrepreneurs hate hearing that when I say this, but it's true. I mean, you could be building a SaaS company in healthcare, you could be building a data processing engine using caching architecture, you could be building agentic platforms, what have you. But the public market doesn't care. What the public market looks at, there's a growth rate, there's a gross margin, there's cost infrastructure, sales, marketing, etc., and ultimately EBITDA. And I try to take my entrepreneurs through that mind shift early in the life cycle. Because the reason Google is not because they dominate in search, but that's because they generate hundreds of $1 million of cash every year, which is the return on equity that they give their investors. And so it's super important for entrepreneurs to understand that early and not fall in love with their product as much as the pain that they're solving and how they're solving it, so that you build the right DNA strands into your financial structure early. And ultimately, when you're at scale, you become a cash spitting engine, which is the only way to survive as a company, as a public company, over the long arc of time. So ideas and optimizations that you do early in a company's life cycle are super hard to do when you're at scale. The examples of that are: what percentage of my direct sales or sales should be direct versus channel? Should I have a OEM business or not? I mean, these all translate into like massive EBITDA swings. So we are experienced early stage investors that have seen late stage and seen scale. So we can bring those lessons early into the playbook. And I think that's why we believe these companies ultimately become great companies that we get involved in.
Now, some things have changed, like fund size and a few other things in the industry, but the underlying theme of supporting founders and building a successful business that throws out cash on a predictable basis, those fundamentals never change. Let's focus a little bit on Sierra, and I want to come back to some startup conversations. What topics do you focus on at Sierra? What stage do you invest? How many investments do you make roughly in every year?
Sierra would be in the venture ecosystem considered early stage fund, which means that we focus on Series Seed and Series A's, and I'll dimensionalize those for you in a second. We are exclusively focused on enterprise businesses, which includes obviously all the stuff that's going on with agentic AI and how that's getting consumed by verticals and so forth. But we also have a small sliver of a practice that looks at deep tech and how deep tech is going to flow into the enterprise. So my partner Ben specializes in that. I was telling one of our limited partners the other day that we are just blessed with the direction of the market, because if we thought in 2012 that focusing on B2B was the right strategy, B2B has actually 100x'd in opportunity size, because AI is now trickling into every vertical and market segment that traditionally, B2B could not approach because of market inefficiencies. So we focus on early stage. We flex our check sizes up and down. We really look at and sit with the entrepreneur and say, what do you need in the bank to get to the next set of meaningful milestones in the next 12 to 18 months? And we run the math back from there. So if the answer is 2 million, we'll give you that. If it's 4, we'll give you that. If it's 8, we'll give you that. And so it's really being very operationally focused and ensuring that we get you to that next stage of visible milestones that a quality late stage investor, when they look at that, they say, okay, I want to write a $30 million check, which might be the Series B and so forth. So we tell entrepreneurs that we co-own with you the outputs, and we will travel this journey together, and we'll underwrite that journey with you with dollars. So it's fungible because seeds are becoming fat seeds and A's are all over the place. But we really look at the operating plan, look at the milestones deeply. One of the advantages, Gopi, of being a known fund for this long, both locally and internationally, is that we have the pleasure of the late stage funds really trusting the product we put into the market, because they know the amount of work we do between writing the check and showing up at calling one of our late stage funds and saying, hey, I think this deal is ready. You guys should take a look. So that signal of quality attracts the right kind of investor to the right opportunity. And we obsess on that quality of our early stage companies that hit the late stage markets and what kind of KPIs they're putting out there.
When you go in front of a founder and you tell the founder, I can flex, I can write a $2 million check, $5 million check, $8 million check, or even a $10 million check, isn't the natural answer from the founder, I'll take the max? And what's wrong with that statement?
Yeah, I think what's wrong with the statement is that the cap table that you're powering with these dollars is a limited asset. There's only 100 points to go around. And what you want to do is you want to raise the right amount of capital at the right valuation, so that ultimately all the people that are investing feel they invested at the right value. and they're getting the right multiple as investors coming in. And you ultimately feel that the right amount of dilution at the right stage so that there's enough left for you and the employees of the company. So that's one thought stream that we discuss with them, which means that if you come in and say you think you need $4 million, then let's raise six. Let's make sure we have a little more kind of flex in the balance sheet. But the reason you don't want to raise 10 is because either you'll over dilute or you'll put your mark, your pre-money and post-money at such a astronomical place relative to the size of your business that it's going to make the next round very, very hard. So I try to tell entrepreneurs, build companies with no stretch marks. Just gradually get your valuation up as you're hitting the milestones. And I think if you do that, you'll be happy. Your incoming investors will be happy. There are lots of other stresses you're going to feel as an entrepreneur. Don't create this stress when you don't need to. The entrepreneurs that we choose to partner with understand that. And by the way, there are entrepreneurs that don't buy into that and they want to raise the most amount of capital. And the reality is, there are many, many options to raise capital, and Sierra is not the only one. We are comfortable with them finding another investing partner.
This is a very thoughtful, measured approach to investing. And like you said, you're a co owner of the business in the end. So you care
Yeah,
about the success of the business, not just bloating up the cap table. Let's talk about some specific examples of companies you've invested in. How did you meet the founder? What goes on in the first meeting and the second meeting? Can you give an example of a conversation you had with the founder that led to an investment? How did you meet the founder? What questions did you ask the founder? What were you looking for?
I'll give you an example and then I'll answer the second part of the question on broadly what is it that I look for. The example is this company called Eudia, which is in the legal tech space. They build a AI powered air gapped stack that they sell to the chief legal officer. And in doing so, they are able to transform the legal operation of a Fortune 500 company. So the idea is that these companies are spending tens of millions of dollars on internal legal teams and hundreds of millions of dollars on external legal teams. How does one create an AI first platform that allows them to run more efficiently and change the economics of the overall $250 million of spend they do every year, which is very common, by the way, if you look at the expense lines in legal alone for the Fortune 500. So Omar Haroon, who's the CEO, is somebody that I've invested in at a company called TextIQ, which was in Fund 11 for us. And he was not the founder. He was one of the senior folks at the company. He ran sales and go to market. But I was always struck by his customer obsession and just how thoughtful he was, even when we were investors in TextIQ, based in New York City. So that company had a moderately successful exit, I think, in the 100 to $150 million range, which is not the outcomes we look for. Obviously, being early stage, we're taking on a lot of risk and we look for a lot larger outcomes. So a couple of years after that event, Omar comes back, this time with his second idea, second company, which is Eudia. What I was struck by is that Omar and his co-founders, Ashish and David, had done 100 customer interviews, literally a binder this thick of conversations with these chief legal officers. And here's the risk, here's what they're looking for, here's what they buy about the value proposition, and here's the things that have still to be proven, right? So, a very rational way to approach the problem. But I felt that this was going to be certainly a green field because this category has not been captured by software. But I think AI will flow into the chief legal officer's office as well. Omar and his team have unfair advantage given the last company. And Omar himself happens to be a JD from Columbia, so obviously understands the domain extremely deep and was very prepared mind about the problem he was trying to solve. So we led the seed round along with our friends from Floodgate, and they've gone on and raised additional capital from General Catalyst and so forth. And the company is absolutely ripping the cover off the ball as they establish the category. These customers are paying them now $2, $5, $10 million a year because the impact on the business is so dramatic. So that's a great example of a company that I've recently invested in. But independent of me knowing Omar, that made it obviously easier. But the key point I want to get across to your audience is that he had done his work and had unique insight into what the customers wanted. And I think that impressed me more than anything else. The biggest thing was that this was the entrepreneur that'll solve this problem, given the unique insight he has in the market. So the takeaway from that story is that do the work and fall in love with the customer's problem, not your technology. Show that work to the early stage VC partner that you're pitching or talking to.
It's great to see that. He did hundreds of interviews to do the customer discovery process and understand what customers really want, and that makes a big difference. Now, although he was a lawyer, Omar only practiced law for a few years, but he's been actually working at companies for a long time. And he had never built anything in legal tech before, to my knowledge, from what I see. And Ashish and David, the other two co founders, don't really have a lot of domain experience in legal tech. Legal tech as a category also was not very prevalent until a few years ago. This was a very different kind of company, and you took a contrarian bet where the founders had Omar was a lawyer, but I would say none of them had deep experience in legal tech. But yet you take the approach that, yeah, this team can build something and create a new category. Is that common?
So I think, firstly, there's several examples of an entrepreneur jumping into a category and learning the category and building something amazing. I don't think this is a disqualifying point, but in Omar's case, just to be clear, he did have experience in legal tech because TextIQ, the company that I've referenced before, had gotten sold to Relativity, which is another large company in the legal tech space. The point I'm trying to make is that in Omar's case, he did have somewhat an experience, although didn't have the enterprise legal, GTM and all the learnings that the company is going through right now. I think it certainly makes it harder if you don't have a perspective in a particular vertical. But I think Omar had two of the three legs of the stool. Like, he was a lawyer, he had had a modest exit in that vertical before. The piece that he had to learn along with his team was how do you go after the Fortune 500 and convince them to buy an AI stack? And it's a transformation story. And I think that's the portion that they've really spent a lot of time on as the company has gone from a seed company to a Series A and beyond company. But I'm willing to take the bet on founders that have done the work. And there's been a lot of successes where you don't know anything about the vertical and you kind of move into it. Just showing up and saying, hey, I was a successful entrepreneur before, and anything I touch is going to be gold, is, I think, a fool's errand, because the market will chew you up if you don't know the details.
It's interesting that unique insights mattered more to you, and you highlighted that ahead of his domain experience and the fact that he was a successful entrepreneur. Those things help, but the work that he's done was the most impressive part that made you take the meeting forward to consider an investment. Very interesting approach. How many such meetings do you take, and how often do you say yes to an investment? How often do you say no?
So obviously, our business, Gopi, fortunately or unfortunately, there's a lot more no's than yeses, as you well know. The fund does about 35 investments per fund cycle, which would be 10 investments per year. And if you run the math on the people that are writing checks at Sierra, that leads to about two investments a year. So we're very, very selective. I meet hundreds of founders individually a year. And many times, you meet them multiple times before really getting conviction that this is the team to back. We have the benefit of a couple of things. One is historical perspective on how these spaces are moving. We have, as you well know, and you attended our CXO conferences, Gopi, we have a very active CXO advisory board. So these are chief information officers, chief data officers, CISOs from Fortune 1000 companies that provide deep perspective on the pain that they're feeling and where the gaps are that they're not getting filled by the large ISVs that they partner with, like the Oracles and the AWS of the world. And then the third is the entrepreneurial perspective. So we learn a lot from entrepreneurial conversations. And we try to always triangulate between these three knowledge streams, if you may, to strengthen our thesis on why a particular space is going to yield a large company. And the next stage becomes finding the right investment in that thesis, which is where we are now meeting 5 to 7 companies in a given subcategory and then deciding that this has the best probability to succeed. And by the way, there's also a culture fit with Sierra, because sometimes you might be looking at 7 companies in a subcategory where the number one company there may want to run the playbook differently than the way we think it should be run. And that's when we end up not writing the check. But we're fine because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're willing to take a bet that over the long arc of time, our investment can outrun the others.
I've been to some of your CXO events and I've interacted with many of your colleagues, and I can see how thoughtfully you're building Sierra. And it's not trivial to build a VC firm, and it's very, very difficult to build a firm that lasts 3 decades. So, congratulations on what you've done so far. I'm curious to ask, in these 3 decades, you've been very disciplined and focused on enterprise infrastructure. But there have been so many success stories in B2C, consumer products, or crypto, and a few other themes like that. Do you ever get tempted to explore other ideas?
Well, I think we always get tempted because we're intellectually curious animals. That's what I look for, quality number one, when I'm interviewing for new investors and teammates. So obviously you're consuming all this data, you're tempted. But I think ultimately the realization is that there are many ways to multiply capital. We as general partners of a Sierra fund are not confused about our comp plan, what our LPs expect. What our LPs expect is not, are you investing in crypto or are you investing in XYZ topical technology that's breaking? But do you have unfair competitive advantage in finding the best entrepreneurs that build foundational companies which can 3, 5, 10x a fund? And I think that if you look at the market through that lens, and we're always testing for sub markets, by the way, we've done investments in quantum, we've done investments in 3D printing. So we are constantly putting our toe to make sure that we're prepared mind. But I think the core thesis of the fund is always anchored on, do we have enough inventory of great companies and ideas, and are the markets growing fast enough that we can produce the outcomes our LPs are investing. So when you put the dynamics of the overall market through that lens, the answer keeps coming back to stay with B2B. And like I said earlier, B2B has just gone from strength to strength. This was many, many times larger than it was in 2012. A lot of it has to do with obviously 2022 when ChatGPT and Gen AI arrived. And I think that's just going to pay dividends over the next 20, 30 years, in my opinion.
You have seen a lot over the past 3 decades in venture. The ecosystem has evolved. What's one thing you would like to see change in the venture capital ecosystem to make this industry better?
That's a really thoughtful question, Gopi, one I think about quite deeply. And this is obviously independent of Sierra. My thinking is that the greatest gift that we have as a country is entrepreneurship. And this has got nothing to do with tech entrepreneurship. It's generally Americans are entrepreneurs. We've innovated in every sector known to man when you go back to kind of the founding fathers and everything that's happened. Now we talk about entrepreneurship, obviously, through the lens of technology, but we should not forget that this company innovated on every single market, and we had the top innovators in those markets, and you can test that through the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, and even in the prior century. So the way that gets unlocked is through the American mindset and the structure that the government provides to invest in these things to really propel these entrepreneurs to do their best work. I think that's the goose that's been laying golden eggs for this country for many centuries. And I hope that we never lose that structural advantage that the country has given entrepreneurs. And the way it lands in our lap is the regulations that govern how capital flows into early stage, mid stage, and late stage capital to support these entrepreneurs. It is governed by antitrust laws and everything else that we deal with, and not making them too constraining. I think that's super important. So as long as the government can kind of keep keen eye on the input and the output and not over-regulate, I think the country will do fine. And just let the capital flow where it needs to go. Because without capital, entrepreneurs cannot do their work. Because as you well know, the negative cash flows are deep and hard before these companies start to inflect. So support the ecosystem. And this is not a California versus Texas statement. This is not a red or blue statement. It is the national asset statement that I'm trying to make. I hope that gets represented in Washington, D.C., and they create the structures needed for us to succeed.
The spirit of entrepreneurship is uniquely different about the US compared to many other countries. Regulations can make or break founder's journey, and rightfully said, beautifully articulated. Thank you for highlighting that. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, and I want to ask you about your community involvement. Is there a nonprofit organization you're passionate about? Which one?
I was lucky to get involved with the American Indian Foundation. They support about 350 NGOs in India and really trying to get at the heart of how do you make the underprivileged in India more successful. And it's a way for my family and us to give back to what created us in the first place and allowed us the education and the environment to thrive as international citizens. And it's a small give back. So Lata and her team have done a phenomenal job. And AIF, I think, has raised over $350 million through people like yourself and me and others that have been blessed to create generational wealth because of what America has given us. So AIF is where we spend a lot of our time. It's a great organization and they do tremendous work on the ground in India, which is great to see.
Tim, thank you very much for spending time with me. It was a pleasure talking to you. We could keep going for at least another hour. We haven't even touched the topic of artificial intelligence, trends that are happening in India, the India-US corridor, and many other topics. I hope we can continue this conversation in another podcast in the future. But I really appreciate that you shared specific examples from your experience, your engagement with Founder, your philosophy of investing. I look forward to sharing your nuggets of wisdom with the world.
Thank you, Gopi. Thanks for the invite. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to The Sure Shot Entrepreneur. I hope you enjoyed listening to real-life stories about early believers supporting ambitious entrepreneurs. Please subscribe to the podcast and post a review. Your comments will help other entrepreneurs find this podcast. I look forward to catching you at the next episode.